Hi, my name is Dr. Matt Bowker, and I want to share with you today some of the profounder wisdom to be found in Plato's cave allegory. Surely one of the most talked about, best known, well recognized stories, allegories, similes, metaphors in the history of Western philosophy. If you're getting told that the cave allegory is just an illustration or a dramatization of Plato's divided line, then you're getting shortchanged. The divided line is actually quite boring. It's an exercise in diagramming on a single axis the differences between dialectical reasoning on one end and illusion and falsehood on the other. But it's much more than this. And I think I can explain to you a few of the basic nuggets of this story or allegory in a short period of time. So I'm going to try to do that. The story is, if you haven't heard it or read it, that there's a cave and it's a deep underground cave. If you look at it from the side, it's shaped something like a shoe. And in the toe of the shoe or the base of the cave, there are some underground cave dwellers. These cave dwellers are chained and fastened. Their necks and heads are chained and fastened so that they can only look at the wall in front of them, the cave wall, on which is reflected shadows, illusions, various reflections from a fire that is burning behind them. There's a whole contraption to this. There's a wall and people carrying objects up and down a street. You don't need to know that. You can. It's a fairly quick read. The point of the story really is a story of conversion or revolution even, because it's a story of turning around. And Plato poses the initial question to us: what would happen if someone broke the chains of someone who has spent his, her, or their entire life staring at a brick wall, looking only at shadows, and turned them toward the light, as it were? The first light is just the light of the fire. As they climb out the cave, it's eventually the light of the sun, which is even brighter and which obviously would blind them even more. The answer is, of course, that a person who is so converted or forcibly turned to see a new reality is going to be in extreme pain and extreme duress. Their eyes literally will not be able to adjust to this new reality or this new light. They will think you're crazy for having done this to them. You've taken them away from everything they know and exposed them to pain and misery. This is why I think the first kernel of truth to be gleaned from the allegory is that the chains that are holding the cave dwellers in the cave are really themselves metaphors within the broader metaphor of the cave. They are not what is keeping the cave dwellers down. What's keeping the cave dwellers down in the toe of the shoe or at the boot of the cave is their own familiarity with what they've learned to be reality, with what they've understood to be the real world and all of its manifestations. And you're telling them this is not true. You've just been seeing reflections, shadows, blurred images, falsehoods your whole life, and now I'm going to show you something new. And so their reaction is obviously a very negative one. And you would have to, Plato says, forcibly drag one of the cave dwellers out of the cave toward the fire, which would burn his or her or their eyes up towards the light, which would completely blind them for possibly many years until they became adjusted to this new way of seeing things up at the ground level, where you can see the light of the sun, and people would first have to look into the reflections only at night, and then they would have to look into water, and then eventually they might be able to raise their eyes up and see the light of day. But this is a long and difficult process. That's part of the story, but it's not the whole story. It gets a lot trickier because not only are the chains metaphorical, but what Plato wants to say here is the process of the one who has seen the light, the enlightened philosopher, who has come down from the place of the ground level, seeing the sun, and then comes back down into the cave, is a very precarious one. This is not something that philosophers are going to want to undertake willingly. They're not interested in the games and the occupations of the people who live in the base of the cave. He imagines that they might have a series of, I don't know, sort of like game shows for who can guess what the next shadow is going to be on the wall, or what shape is going to follow what shape in what sequence, or some sort of nonsensical trivia like this. It's going to mean nothing to someone who's seen the light and knows that these are all blurry reflections of a fake reality imposed upon a fake reality. So the philosopher who returns is in another precarious position, because he or she or they come down into a world, and this is the second real nugget of truth in the allegory, is this person is blinded by darkness, much the way the cave dweller who is brought to the light is blinded by light. And that gives us one of Plato's most memorable phrases, which is that there are two ways to go blind. You can go blind from exposure to enlightenment or light, and you can go blind by exposure to darkness, to dimming, to something less than what is in the full light of day, the truth. We have to know in our lives, if we're being revolutionized, if we're thinking about revolutions, if we're thinking about conversions, if we're thinking about personal conversions or political conversions, that there are two ways to go wrong here, and we have to know which is which. We have to know whether we are being blinded because something is dimming our lights, or whether we're being blinded because we're being introduced to something new and fascinating and profound that is actually closer to reality. But it's impossible to tell in the moment which is which until you've achieved enlightenment. Then you know. Then you know that you're going back down into the cave, possibly against your will, to try to recruit and convert other cave dwellers to come up and see the light along with you, and then know the truth and be better for it as a society. So Plato wants to say the philosopher is in, and he'll say this again, and I'll talk about it again probably in my next video, that the philosopher is in a very difficult situation. Not only does he want to do this, not want to do this, he, she, or they not want to do this, not only does the philosopher have an aversion to the games being played down at the bottom of the cave, but what's worse, the people at the bottom of the cave, at the boot of the cave, are going to think that the philosopher is mad and maybe even murder him or her or they, because what that person is pronouncing on as reality sounds insane to them. This is, in some vague sense, what happened to Plato's beloved teacher and beloved in general, Socrates, who was accused of corrupting the youth with untruth. When in Plato's mind and in many people's mind, Socrates is actually someone who has achieved the apex of wisdom, but this couldn't be handled by the democracy of Athens, and therefore he was expunged from that society by being forced to commit suicide, as you all know. Before you decide that Plato is an elitist here, you have to think, the question arises, why should we make philosophers do this? Once they achieve enlightenment, shouldn't they just stay at the top and reside there happily and know the truth? And Plato says the real reason why those who know the truth or see the greater truth have to go down, keep going back down into the cave and trying to convert followers is because when you're constructing a society, or when you're even constructing a philosophy, you want to be thinking about the whole, not just one or two of its parts. So this is where Plato comes off as less elitist than at other times, and more socialistic or communistic than at other times, because he really is now speaking for the whole. It's for the good of the entire group that those with wisdom try to train and teach those without wisdom, and it is a difficult process on many levels to do this. I think those are the central nuggets of Plato's cave allegory that we need to remember. And if people try to tell you differently, that it's just an illustration or a dramatization, then you're not getting the profounder truth.